My name is Jessie Ace. I'm part of a group of ENabled Warriors that you've probably never heard of. We're fighting back against our invisible illness and taking the dis out of disability. We don't give sympathy to our symptoms. They enable us to be the warrior that we are. If you ask doctors and nurses, they'd say what we're doing is impossible. But pushing the limits of our conditions is something that we have to break through every single day. If we push the limits, we are mentally strong. We can do anything. The question is, how far can we push those limits? This podcast will give you the answers. I'm Jessie Ace, and this is the Disabled to Enabled podcast. Okay, let's get into the first part of our interview with today's guest. So this section focuses on the actual diagnosis, what their illness is, and how it affects our guest. Keep listening out for part 2 to find out how they coped and thrived afterward. And then in part 3, listen out for today's guest's answers in the super quick secrets round. Or should we say not so super quick secrets round? Our next guest was originally diagnosed with Balo's concentric sclerosis in August 2018 at 23 years old after being told it was most likely terminal cancer. And whilst battling her mental health, she was re-diagnosed with relapsing-remitting multiple sclerosis. She's now the individual giving and legacies manager at the MS Trust, handling direct contributions that do not come from community events and fundraising. She also runs campaigns like MS Doesn't Stop and promotes legacy gifts as well. ENabled Warriors, please help me in welcoming to the show the amazing Marissa Green, everybody! Woo! Hey, lovely, how you doing?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Let's jump straight into the first part of our episode by chatting about your initial diagnosis. Like, how did you first know that something was wrong?
I'm sure that my journey to diagnosis is probably really similar to a lot of other people. I started having really severe symptoms during the huge heat wave in August 2018. And knowing more now, I understand that heat obviously has a huge impact on MS. So I'm sure that triggered it. But mostly it was just limbs not working, falling asleep at my desk in work, not where I work now, where I used to work. And generally just feeling quite lightheaded and like I didn't have my feet on the ground. So yeah, first stop was the GP.
Yeah, so what happened when you actually went to the GP? Is that where you got what you now know as your misdiagnosis of, is it, how do you pronounce this as well? Is it Balo's concentric sclerosis? I've never heard of that.
Yeah, Balo's concentric sclerosis. Yeah, it was a really funny diagnosis. I won't go into it too much, but I essentially went to the doctors and really similar to a lot of other people, and I even think yourself as well, Jessie, it was assumed that I'd had a stroke.
Yeah.
And that I should go to A&E. And when I was there, they found the lesions in my brain, etc., etc. Long story short, because Balo's concentric sclerosis is a cousin of MS, it behaves really similarly, but it looks like tumours, like cancer tumours.
Wow.
Yeah, because they're so big and they cause so much inflammation compared with other first cases of MS relapses, essentially. I don't know if that made a lot of sense, but yeah. But the reason that they know it's Balo's is simply because the lesions actually have a concentric, almost like onion pattern on them, like layers of an onion. So
wow.
It looked like that at the time, but after a whole big process, very similar to other people with their diagnosis of hospitals and lumbar punctures and scans and everything else. Yeah.
Gosh, that must have been so hard to hear. I mean, how did it feel when you were diagnosed with that? Because you were really young as well at the time.
Yeah, I was 23 when I was diagnosed. Really funnily, because we were being told that it was most likely pretty terminal cancer, I was really excited when I got my diagnosis. It was such a relief. I remember getting the lumbar puncture and thinking, I turned around to my mum and I said, I really hope this is MS, because I was told that those were the two options. So it was a really funny situation. when I found out that it was Balo's and not MS, and that Balo's was incredibly rare, it was actually a bit of a relief because I didn't have any information about anything. So the doctors don't know really anything about it. There isn't enough evidence on it because there aren't enough people who are diagnosed with it. So it was a bit of a double-edged sword. You know, on the one hand, I wanted to know how I could get better. On the other hand, not knowing anything meant I could just resign to whatever was going to happen. So yeah, overall, it was actually quite happy to be diagnosed, which I'm sure a lot of people don't say.
A lot of people do actually say that they are quite relieved because they've had like years and years and years of symptoms, and it finally all makes sense, which is crazy. Like for me, it came completely out of the blue in 3 days, and it went from zero to nothing. To zero to nothing. That makes no sense. Zero to like full on MS thing, and I was like, what? So yeah, I can see from your point of view though, from like going from terminal cancer to MS, I'd be quite relieved as well, if I'm honest. Yeah, I get that.
I think so. There's a lot of dark humor around it now in my family, though. So, you know, it's all good.
Humor's a good coping mechanism as well, though, isn't it? It's like, I mean, how did it kind of affect your mental health at the time?
I really had pretty severe post-traumatic stress disorder from that time. I think that was primarily to do with the potential that it was quite a serious cancer. You know, the doctors never actually said that's exactly what it was, because they're not allowed to do that until they actually have a diagnosis. But they were only doing the lumbar puncture to rule out MS so that they could do a biopsy on my brain and on these lesions. So, you know, everything they were saying, like an oncologist came up and said, oh, I never normally get involved this soon, but we think it might be serious, you know, so I'm going to come and say hi. Actually, that gave me really bad PTSD, but I can see why, even with the kind of more, put this in quotation marks, generic MS diagnosis, you could also get PTSD as well. Because like you said, sometimes it goes from 0 to 100 in 2 minutes. I'd never been in hospital for anything ever. So being in hospital for that long, all of a sudden, you know, you're not allowed out, you have visiting hours, you can't eat what you want, I couldn't have my partner at the time to come and stay, you know, your life just turns upside down. So I think anyone who's receiving a diagnosis of anything, your mental health is just shot for a good while afterwards, and I think that's okay as well.
It is, it totally is, and this is something that's not really spoken about that much out there, is it? It's the kind of the way that it affects your mental health when you are given these diagnoses. So yeah, and the fact that you do go through this kind of grief cycle as well, which also no one talks about.
110%. And I think you grieve everything that you wanted to happen. So this idea of kids and, you know, living abroad and living away from your consultant and not being near a good hospital and all these things, you grieve like that plan that you had for yourself. And then you also grieve the person that you were before. And I was like, oh, why didn't I take more advantage? Why did I not smoke cigarettes? Not that I ever did, mum. And but you know, all these little things, and you do grieve, both ends, I think, from the future and the past.
Yeah, of course, definitely. I mean, how did it feel I know you said you were kind of happy about it, but like, was there a sort of point where you did feel quite depressed when you were properly diagnosed with MS, because you've kind of got this realization of this is now a lifelong thing?
Yeah, so with Balo's, the consultant said that what tends to happen from like the limited knowledge that they have is that someone has a flare up and then can live quite happily for the rest of their lives. That's what they had seen mostly.
Right.
So when I started getting more symptoms and went back for another scan, and they said, actually, we have more information on you now. You have relapsing-remitting MS. I was devastated. I think it was complete depression, because again, that double-edged sword of having that information. On the one hand, it can be really helpful. On the other hand, before I could pretend everything was going to be okay, now now I had a lot of proof that maybe it wasn't going to be. So yeah, I was really depressed. Again, it brought back the PTSD. I was off work for weeks. I couldn't focus, couldn't sleep, couldn't speak to any of my friends. I was really angry with the people closest to me because I couldn't be angry at anything else. So that was who bore the brunt. I ended up, going out quite a lot and kind of getting really drunk. I wouldn't say it was kind of alcoholism or anything, but I would just go out to a party and be like, I don't care, and like have a drink. And yeah, it's a really, really difficult time to get a diagnosis. And the most difficult bit about it is that everyone thinks you look okay. So yeah. Yeah, and you feel like you don't have that permission to be mentally unwell because you look on the outside exactly the same as you did before.
Yeah.
I don't know if you found that, but it was a difficult time. I won't deny. Yeah.
No, I 100% resonate with that for sure. I mean, like, even when, I mean, it's hard anyway when you have an invisible illness, or invisible disability, whatever you want to call it. It's hard anyway when people can't see what's going on the inside, and especially when you're young. I think you have this assumption that, well, you're young, so you should be full of energy and you should be doing this. You should be living life to the full every single day, and it gets tiring, doesn't it?
Draining, absolutely draining. Yeah,
it really
agreed.
is. So, what do you think were your biggest challenges after your diagnosis that you kind of had to overcome?
I think what you were saying before, getting over this idea that you're going to go back to normal. Now I go to bed at 9 o'clock on the dot without fail, and I sleep so much. I sleep, 8 hours a night, and I haven't been doing that. I hadn't been doing that since I was diagnosed a year ago now with the second diagnosis of MS, and I kept trying to keep my life exactly the same as it was before. Doing the same gym regimen, being able to go out to parties, being able to stay up until midnight. And actually, I've so much healthier now that I've accepted that I'm a 25-year-old who goes to bed at 9 p.m. and loves it. And yeah, I think that is the biggest challenge, though, just adapting to something that you didn't really expect. And work, actually. I didn't think about this until now. My old job were really not that accepting. And that was a huge, huge challenge, which at the MS Trust obviously is not an issue at all, but they go above and beyond to make sure that everyone has the best way of working possible. So that was an absolute blessing when that job came along.
That's amazing. So you've actually, and we'll talk about that in the next part, in part 2. Before we go on to the next question, I just want to say, when you're 29, when you get to my age and you get old, right, you get to stay up till 10 p.m.
Oh,
yeah.
Can't wait. Counting it down.
Stay awake past 10 p.m. anymore. It sucks. Anyways, so is there anything that you wish someone had just told you when you were newly diagnosed that you now know now?
That I now know now.
Now. Oh, weird.
I feel you. Do you know what? The main thing is how much your mind and body are connected. So I'm a full-time fundraiser, but I also trained in drama therapy. So I already knew this from the outside, but you don't properly think about it until something happens to you. And actually, I was not looking after myself at all at the beginning after the diagnosis. I was eating badly, takeaways, I was feeling lazy. I was doing really short-term things to make myself feel better. I wish someone had told me at the beginning that actually you need a strong basis of looking after yourself to actually build resilience. And that means loving yourself and eating as healthy as you can, exercising as much as you can and as much as your body allows to your own limits, going into therapy if you can, and those things honestly have impacted so much on my physical health. And I'm not saying that that's a cure for MS whatsoever, but I do think that looking after yourself leads to good mental health, and mental health at least gives you a fighting chance of feeling a bit better than you would if you were depressed. So yeah, I kind of wish someone had told me that at the beginning, but I'm there now.
Absolutely. Well, it's good that you're there now. This is the point, and you know, the benefit of it now is that you've been through that and you can now go and tell everybody else. So
yeah,
it works.
yeah. And I think mental health is 100% the best way to be able to fight all of those obstacles that come up when you have MS. So with every new symptom, with every new numb limb or word that you can't find or anything, if you're already feeling horrendous, those things just push you over the edge, don't they? Whereas if you've had a good 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 hours of sleep, it doesn't feel as bad.
Not as bad, no.
Not as bad.
No.
Yeah.
Sometimes the body doesn't quite get the memo that's been asleep, but most of the time we're good.
Very true. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, thank you so much, Marissa. Disabled Warriors, that's it for part 1. In the next part, we will discuss the amazing things that our guest today has done since their diagnosis. Warriors, look out for part 2. And if there is anything that we've spoken about so far that you can relate to, then please tell us in the comments, and remember to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening today. Enabled Warriors, do you want to win a copy of the ENabled Warrior Symptom Tracker book for free? The Symptom Tracker book will allow you to track your symptoms, instantly spot triggers, and get the best care possible from your doctors. Dr. Gretchen Hawley from the MS Link said it was brilliant for those with chronic illnesses to give their doctors more accurate information. Recording these nuggets of information can be a game changer in receiving the best care for you and your symptoms. Inside the book, you'll find everything that you need to live your best life with chronic illness. Have you ever sat in an appointment and couldn't recall when your symptoms started, how long they lasted, the date of your first relapse, how long you've been on medication? Oh, me too. It's so annoying. That's why I made these pages in the book to help with this. Do you want to find out what foods are triggering your symptoms? Great, that's in the book too. Do you wish that you could wake up feeling positive and energetic every single day? The daily sheets in this book will help you do just that. Enter the giveaway by going to www.mybookgiveaway.com and enter your details through the message on Facebook Messenger that will pop up. If you are impatient and you want one now, then go get your Enabled Warrior Tracker book from www.enabledwarriors.org/book. Both of the links are in the show notes, so go and click them there. And get in control of your chronic illness today and start living the life you deserve. Stay enabled, Warriors. Warriors listening, if you've enjoyed this episode and you want to win $100, leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tell us what you liked best. We'll choose one review at random each month to win $100, and after you've left your review, remember, go and click that subscribe button. Are you ready to fight back against your chronic illness and go from being disabled to enabled? Do you want to be an enabled warrior, someone who's brave, strong, and confident, and someone who's ready to find a way to achieve awesome things despite a diagnosis? This is your invitation. Check out DISabledtoENabled.com for articles and reviews to find out how you can become enabled too. Subscribe to the podcast to always be in the know. If you think this podcast is better than sleeping in on a Sunday, tickle that subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening. And make sure to share this episode with someone who needs some inspiration. Want to ask your questions to future guests? Make sure to join our Enabled Warriors tribe on Facebook and look out for our question posts. Before we go, check out DISabledtoENabled on Instagram for posts that tell it like it is. And remember, Warriors, stay enabled.